the Vampire King's son, was born deaf until the waitress pulled out. Something that shocked him. Silence is not empty, the old nannies used to whisper in the hallowed, blood-soaked halls of Inglewood Manor. It is full of answers. But for Kai Inglewood, the Vampire King, silence was a curse, a heavy, suffocating shroud that wrapped around his only son, isolating the boy from a world that demanded obedience and fear. Kai could conquer kingdoms, drain rebellions dry, and command the shadows, yet he could not bridge the abyss between himself and the child who looked at him with desperate, screaming eyes. He needed a miracle, or perhaps a mercy. He never expected to find it in a grease-stained diner at 2 a.m., in the hands of a human who didn't tremble when the monsters walked in. The rain in the city of Oak Haven didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. It was a Tuesday, the graveyard shift at the Midnight Fork, and Josie Danvers was 3 hours away from losing her mind and her apartment. "Order up on table 4, Josie, and for the love of God, smile. You look like you're at a funeral." The cook, a greasy man named Earl, barked from the pass-through window. Josie wiped her hands on her apron, pushing a stray lock of damp chestnut hair out of her eyes. "If I smile any wider, Earl, my face will crack, and then you'll really have a horror show." She grabbed the plate of lukewarm fries and navigated the checkerboard floor. The diner was a sanctuary for the lost, the lonely, and the insomniacs. But tonight, the air felt heavy, charged with a static that made the hair on Josie's arms stand up. The neon sign outside buzzed and flickered, casting a sickly pink glow over the patrons. Then the bell above the door didn't just chime, it seemed to toll. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks clattered onto ceramic. Josie froze, clutching her tray, as the door swung open. A man walked in. No, not a man. To call Kai Inglewood a man was like calling a hurricane a breeze. He was tall, wearing a tailored charcoal coat that cost more than the diner itself. His skin was pale, not with sickness, but with the terrifying perfection of marble. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, dark grey, swirling with an ancient, predatory intelligence. But it was who he held by the hand that caught Josie's attention. A boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old. He was a miniature replica of the king, with the same raven hair and porcelain skin, but his face was twisted in a rictus of frustration. He was yanking at the man's hand, his mouth opening in a silent scream, his small boots scuffing violently against the linoleum. "Sit," Kai said. His voice was low, a velvet rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't a shout, but it carried the weight of a command that could level mountains. The boy didn't listen. He couldn't. Josie watched, mesmerized and terrified, as the pair took a booth in the far corner, the one usually reserved for drug deals or breakups. The Vampire King. Everyone knew the rumors. He ruled the night sector, a sovereign territory within the city. They said he was cruel, unfeeling, a monster who had decimated the Lycan uprising in a single night. But right now, he looked exhausted. "Do not look at them," Sabrina Everly, Josie's co-worker and best friend, hissed in her ear, grabbing her arm. Sabrina's face was drained of color. "That's Inglewood. If you spill coffee on him, we're all dead. Literally drained and left in the alley." "He's just a customer, Sam," Josie whispered back, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "He's a predator, Josie. And that kid? That's the Silent Prince. Rumor has it he's cursed. Broken." Josie looked back at the booth. The boy, Elian, was now sweeping the salt and pepper shakers off the table. Glass shattered. The sound was deafening in the quiet diner. The king didn't flinch. He didn't strike the boy. He just closed his eyes for a second, a look of profound, crushing defeat passing over his features. He grabbed the boy's wrist, firmly but not cruelly, trying to restrain him. Elian thrashed, his small face red, tears streaming down his cheeks. He was trying to say something, needing something, but the bridge wasn't there. Josie felt a pull in her chest. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. She knew that look of frustration. She knew the wall that stood between the boy and the world. "I'll take the table," Josie said, her voice steady. "Are you insane?" Sabrina gripped her tighter. "Let Earl do it." "Earl is hiding in the freezer," Josie pointed out. "I'll do it." She grabbed a fresh pot of coffee and a menu. Her legs felt like lead as she walked across the diner. The air grew colder the closer she got to the booth. The scent of ozone, rain, and expensive cologne filled her senses. When she reached the table, the boy was in the middle of a silent meltdown, banging his fists on the table. Kai was staring out the window, his jaw clenched tight enough to snap steel. "Welcome to the Midnight Fork," Josie said, forcing her voice to remain calm. "Can I get you started with some coffee?" Kai turned his head slowly. His eyes locked onto hers. It felt like being scanned by a laser, cold, invasive, and lethal. For a second, Josie thought he might just kill her for interrupting his misery. "Coffee," he said, the word crisp and sharp, "black, and milk for the boy, if he will drink it." The boy, sensing the vibration of the new arrival, or perhaps seeing the movement, looked up at Josie. His eyes were wide, wet, and filled with a stormy rage. He looked at her mouth, then at her hands, waiting for a cue he never got from anyone else. Josie didn't pour the coffee. Not yet. She set the pot down on the table adjacent to them. She looked at the king, then at the boy. The boy's isolation was a tangible thing, a glass box he was suffocating in. "He's not being bad, you know," Josie said softly. Kai's gaze snapped back to her, narrowing. "Excuse me." "He's not being difficult," she clarified, her hands trembling slightly as she reached into her apron pocket. "He's just loud because he can't hear how loud he is. And he's angry because you aren't listening." The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kai leaned forward, a predator preparing to strike. "Careful, human. You speak of things you do not understand." "I understand enough," Josie said. And then she did the unthinkable. She turned her back on the vampire king and crouched down to eye level with the crying prince. The twist of the knife was subtle. As Josie knelt, the lights in the diner flickered violently, and for a split second, Kai's shadow on the wall didn't match his body. It lunged toward Josie, claws extended, before snapping back into place. The boy, Elian, froze. Adults never crouched. Adults loomed. Adults grabbed. They didn't get down on the dirty linoleum to look him in the eye. Josie took a breath. It had been years since her cousin, who had lost his hearing after a bout of meningitis, had lived with them, but the muscle memory was there. She raised her hands. "Are you hungry?" She signed, her movements fluid and deliberate. She tapped her chin with her fingers, the sign for hungry. Elian's eyes went wide. The tears stopped instantly. He stared at her hands, then up at her face, stunned. It was as if she had just conjured a rabbit out of thin air. Josie smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. She repeated it. "Hungry or thirsty?" She mimed drinking from a cup. Slowly, hesitantly, Elian raised his small, pale hand. His fingers were clumsy, unpracticed, but he mimicked the sign for drink. Kai Inglewood made a sound, a sharp intake of breath that sounded like a crack in a glacier. He was staring at Josie. His mask of indifference shattered. He looked from her hands to his son, his vampire senses hyper-aware of the boy's sudden calm. Josie reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, battered notepad and a crayon she kept for the kids' menus. She drew a quick, crude picture of a burger, a grilled cheese, and a milkshake. She showed it to Elian. What do you want?" She signed, pointing to the paper. Elian slammed his finger onto the picture of the milkshake, a small, toothy grin breaking through his stormy expression. He looked at his father and vigorously tapped the table, then moved his hand in a drinking motion. "Strawberry milkshake," Josie said, standing up and facing the king. She didn't cower. "And fries, with extra ketchup. He likes the red." Kai was silent. For a vampire who had lived 300 years, who had negotiated treaties with warlords and decimated armies, he looked completely unmoored. He looked at his son, who was now sitting quietly, waiting, watching Josie with a look of adoration. "How?" Kai asked. His voice was no longer a command. It was a question wrapped in disbelief. "How did you do that?" "American Sign Language," Josie said, picking up her coffee pot. "He's deaf, isn't he? Not broken, just deaf." "The healers. They said his mind was unreachable. They said he was feral." Kai's voice dripped with a cold fury directed at those absent healers. "He's not feral. He's bored," Josie said, pouring the dark coffee into Kai's cup. Her hand was steady now. "Imagine having a voice, but no one to hear it. Imagine screaming, and everyone just stares at you like you're a puzzle they can't solve." Kai looked at her hands, red-knuckled from scrubbing tables, nails short and unpainted. "You possess a magic I have not seen." "It's not magic, Your Majesty," she said, using the title with a hint of irony. "It's just communication." She went to the kitchen. Earl looked at her like she was a ghost. "You're still alive? Make me a strawberry shake, Earl, and make it the best one you've ever made." When she returned, Elian was waiting. He watched her approach, his eyes tracking her hands. She set the shake down. "Cold," she signed. "Good." Elian took a sip, his eyes lighting up. He looked at Josie and clumsily signed back. "Good." It was a small gesture, a single word, but it was the first time in 6 years the boy had communicated a specific thought to another living being. Kai watched the exchange with an intensity that made Josie's skin prickle. He wasn't looking at her like a waitress anymore. He was looking at her like she was water in a desert. "What is your name?" Kai asked. Josie Danvers." "Josie Danvers." He tested the name on his tongue, making it sound like a spell. "You are wasting your time serving grease to truckers." "I have rent to pay," she said defensively. Kai reached into his coat. He didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out a heavy black card embossed with a silver crest, a wolf and a bat intertwined. He placed it on the table. "My son needs a voice," Kai said, his gaze piercing. "I can give him the world, but I cannot give him that. Come to Inglewood Manor. Tomorrow night. Sunset." I can't just... I will pay you 10 times what you make here in a year, every month," Kai interrupted. "And I will ensure no one ever looks at you with anything other than respect." Josie stared at the card. It was a ticket out of poverty. It was a ticket out of the rat-infested apartment and the debt collectors calling her phone. But it was also an invitation into the lion's den. "Why me?" she asked. "Because," Kai said, standing up. Elian slid out of the booth, clutching his half-finished milkshake, looking at Josie with reluctance to leave. "You are the first person who didn't look at him with pity. You looked at him with expectation." Kai placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Elian looked up, and for the first time, Kai tried to mimic the sign Josie had used. "Come." It was clumsy, terrible form, but Elian understood. The boy took his father's hand. As they walked to the door, the bell chimed again. Kai paused, not looking back. "Do not be late, Miss Danvers. I am not a patient man." Josie watched them leave, her heart pounding a rhythm against her ribs. She looked down at the table. Beside the black card lay a tip. It was a gold coin, ancient, heavy, and stamped with a face that looked disturbingly like Kai, but from a century ago. She picked it up. It was cold, unnaturally so. Suddenly, Sabrina was at her elbow. "Oh my God, did he just proposition you?" "No," Josie whispered, thumbing the ridge of the coin. "He just hired me." "Josie, look at the table," Sabrina said, her voice trembling. Josie looked down. Where Elian had been drumming his fingers on the laminate table during his tantrum, the surface wasn't just scratched. There were indentations, deep ones. Fingerprints pressed into the hard composite wood as if it were soft clay. The boy didn't just have a temper. He had strength. Uncontrolled, dangerous, vampire strength. And Josie had just agreed to be his teacher. The bus ride to the night sector took an hour, and with every stop, the passengers became fewer and stranger. By the time Josie stepped off at the iron gates of Inglewood Manor, she was the only human left. The sky was a bruised purple, the sun having just dipped below the horizon, surrendering the world to Kai's kind. The manor was a gothic monstrosity of stone and glass, perched on a cliff overlooking the churning ocean. It screamed old money and older blood. Josie clutched her bag tighter. She had packed her few books on ASL, some flashcards and a change of clothes. She told herself she could leave if it got too weird. She lied to herself often. The gates groaned open before she could touch the intercom. A long, winding driveway, lined with weeping willows, led to the main entrance. Waiting for her at the massive oak doors was not Kai, but a woman. She was tall, with hair like spun gold, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She wore a dress of crimson silk that looked like a fresh wound against the grey stone. "You must be the waitress," the woman said. Her voice was light, musical, and utterly dismissive. "I am Marina Brighton. The king asked me to process you." "Process me?" Josie asked, stepping out of the chilly wind. "I'm here to teach Elian." Marina laughed, a tinkling sound. "Elian. Yes. The little broken prince. Kai is desperate, isn't he? Dragging strays in from the street." She circled Josie, sniffing delicately. "You smell like onions and cheap detergent. Are we sure you're not lunch?" "I have an appointment," Josie said, straightening her spine. She wasn't going to let this high society leech intimidate her. "With the king." "The king is busy ruling," Marina snapped, her eyes flashing red for a split second. "I run this household, and I don't think you'll last the night. The last governess left in tears. The one before, that left in a body bag." Josie's stomach twisted, but she held her ground. "Good thing I'm not a governess. I'm a tutor." "Marina," a voice boomed from the shadows of the grand staircase. Kai materialized from the gloom. He had shed the coat and was wearing a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing pale, muscular forearms. He looked less like a king and more like a warrior at rest. "That is enough," Kai said, descending the stairs. His eyes were fixed on Josie. "You came." "You left a gold coin as a tip," Josie said. "I figured the pay was real." "It is." Kai stopped in front of her. Up close, his presence was overwhelming. He smelled of rain and ancient dust. "Marina, leave us. Take the staff to the west wing." Marina bristled, her perfect mask slipping. "Kai, surely you don't intend to leave her alone with the boy. He's volatile today. He shattered a mirror this morning." "Go," Kai said. He didn't raise his voice, but the shadows in the room seemed to lengthen and sharpen, pointing like daggers at Marina. She huffed, glared at Josie with venomous promise, and swept away. "Follow me," Kai said. He led Josie through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. They arrived at a heavy door at the end of the hall. Kai hesitated, his hand hovering over the handle. "He destroys everything," Kai said softly, his back to her. "Toys, furniture, people. He doesn't mean to. But his frustration, it manifests as force. He needs an outlet," Josie said. "Language is an outlet." Kai opened the door. The room was vast, filled with broken toys and shredded curtains. In the centre, sitting what amidst the wreckage of a train set, was Elian. He was staring at the floor, rocking slightly. Josie stepped in. She didn't look at the damage. She walked straight to the boy and sat down on the floor, crossing her legs. She tapped the floor twice. The vibration made Elian look up. His eyes widened. He recognized her. The lady with the hands. Josie smiled and pulled a bright red apple out of her bag. She held it up. "Apple," she signed, making the motion against her cheek. Elian stared. He looked at the apple, then at her hand. Slowly, his small fist came up to his cheek. He twisted it. "Apple." Josie tossed him the apple. He caught it with supernatural reflexes. Kai watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame. For the first time in centuries, the crushing weight on his chest lightened. "We start with nouns," Josie said, not looking back at the king. "Then verbs, then feelings. He has a lot of feelings to get out." "You have free rein," Kai said. "Whatever you need, ask." "I need a classroom," Josie said. "Not a playroom, a place with a desk, and I need you to learn too." Kai blinked. "Me?" "He needs to talk to his father, not just the help," Josie said, turning to face him. "If you don't learn, he's still alone." It was a challenge. No one challenged the Vampire King. Kai stared at her, the grey storm in his eyes swirling. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth quirked up. A smile. It was terrifying and beautiful. "Very well, Miss Danvers. Teach me." As the lesson began, Josie felt a strange heat on the back of her neck. She glanced toward the window. Outside, in the dark garden, a figure stood in the rain, watching them. It was an older woman, draped in ragged velvet. Lorelei Yardley, the seer of the court. Her white eyes were fixed on Josie. Lorelei raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. She wasn't looking at Josie's face. She was looking at Josie's hands as she signed. And then, Josie saw it. As she signed the word for father to Kai, a faint, glowing sigil etched itself into the air where her fingers moved, a silver trail of light, visible only for a heartbeat. Kai didn't see it. Elian didn't see it. But Josie saw it, and so did the seer outside. Josie's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't just making shapes. The magic Kai had spoken of. Maybe he was right. Maybe sign language wasn't just a language here. Maybe it was a spell. And she had just cast it on the king. The days at Inglewood Manor bled into nights, a rhythm of shadows and silence that Josie was slowly learning to navigate. Elian was a sponge. He absorbed signs with a hunger that broke Josie's heart, devouring the ability to name his world. Book, rain, hunger, sad. But it was the word father that changed everything. It happened on a Thursday, amidst a thunderstorm that rattled the leaded glass windows of the library. Kai was present, as he always was now, leaning against the mahogany bookshelves, pretending to read reports while watching Josie's hands with an intensity that made the air hum. "He is struggling with the concept of king," Josie said, breaking the quiet. She sat on the Persian rug across from Elian. "It's too abstract. He knows you're his dad. He doesn't know you rule the city." "He knows fear," Kai said, his voice low. "He sees how the staff looks at me. That is enough of a lesson in kingship." "It's not enough," Josie countered. She turned to Elian. She tapped her chest. "Josie." She pointed to Elian. "Elian." She pointed to Kai. "Father." Then she decided to try something new. She made the sign for king, a K hand shape, moving from the left shoulder to the right hip, like a sash. As her hand swept across her chest, the air rippled. It wasn't a trick of the light this time. A ribbon of silver luminescence trailed her fingers, hanging in the air like burning magnesium before fading into sparks. Elian gasped, his eyes tracking the fading light. He looked at his own hand and tried to mimic it. Nothing happened. He looked back at Josie, confused. Kai was across the room in a blur of motion. One moment he was by the books, The next, he was towering over Josie, his hand gripping her wrist. His skin was ice cold, his grip iron hard. "What did you do?" he demanded, his eyes flashing a dangerous, luminescent grey. I just signed," Josie stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. She tried to pull away, but he held fast. "You're hurting me." Kai released her instantly, looking at his own hand, as if it had betrayed him. "You are not just signing, Josie Danvers. You are weaving." "Weaving?" From the shadows of the hallway, a rasping voice answered. "She speaks the first tongue, my king. Or rather, her hands do." Lorelei Yardley, the seer, shuffled into the room. She looked like a pile of rags held together by spite and old magic, her milky eyes fixed on Josie. Humans have forgotten, but once, language was not just sound, it was shape, it was intent. You have a weaver's blood, girl. You don't just describe the world, you define it. Josie rubbed her wrist. "I'm just a waitress." "And a match is just a stick of wood until you strike it," Lorelei cackled. "The boy responds to her because she is amplifying his will. She is the bridge, but bridges can be burned." Kai looked at Josie with a new expression. It wasn't just desire or gratitude anymore. It was calculation. "If she is a weaver," Kai said to the seer, "then she is a target." "Indeed," Lorelei murmured. "The High Council does not like unauthorized magic, and Marina does not like competition." As if summoned, the heavy oak doors creaked open. But it wasn't Marina. It was a woman who didn't walk. She poured herself into the room. She wore a tuxedo suit that was tailored within an inch of its life, her hair a sleek bob of jet black. She held a cigarette holder, though it was unlit. "Oh, darling, stop being so dramatic," the newcomer drawled. She looked at Kai, then at Josie, her lips curving into a smirk that was equal parts charm and menace. "So this is the little human pet everyone is whispering about in the Undercity." "Veronica," Kai said, his posture stiffening. "I didn't know you were in Oakhaven." "Veronica Starling," the woman introduced herself to Josie, ignoring Kai. She extended a gloved hand. "I handle Kai's messier public relations, and darling, you are becoming a very messy PR problem." Josie took the hand. It was cold, but unlike Kai's marble chill, Veronica's cold felt electric. "Nice to meet you," Josie managed. "We'll see," Veronica purred. "The council is holding a gala on Saturday. The Blood Moon Ball. They want to see the prince, and they want to see the tutor." "No," Kai said immediately. "Elian is not ready, and Josie is human. It's a death sentence. If you hide her, they will assume you are building a weapon," Veronica said, her eyes sharpening. "Bring her. Let them see she is just a harmless little thing with nimble fingers. Unless, of course." Veronica leaned in, smelling of clove cigarettes and dried blood. "She isn't harmless." Josie looked at Elian, who was watching the adults with wide, fearful eyes. He sensed the tension. He signed, scared. Josie signed back, "Safe. I am here." As she signed safe, crossing her wrists over her chest, a shimmering, translucent dome of light pulsed around Elian for a heartbeat. Veronica's jaw dropped. "Well," she whispered, "that changes the dress code." The Blood Moon Ball was held in the Obsidian Spire, a skyscraper in the center of the night sector that pierced the clouds like a black needle. The elevator ride up took an eternity. Josie stood in the corner of the glass box, smoothing the fabric of the dress Veronica had provided. It was a midnight blue velvet that hugged her curves and left her shoulders bare. It was beautiful, but she felt like a sacrificial offering, wrapped in expensive paper. Kai stood beside her, silent. He wore a formal military uniform from an era long past, black with silver epaulets. He looked devastating. "Stay close to me," Kai said, not looking at her. "Do not speak unless spoken to." And for the love of the ancestors, do not sign unless it is an emergency. Your hands are a beacon." "You're the king," Josie whispered. "Can't you just tell them to leave us alone?" Kai turned to her. The elevator lights reflected in his storm-grey eyes. "I am a king, Josie, not a god. My throne sits on a foundation of alliances and threats. If they think you are a threat I cannot control, they will kill you to weaken me." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline. The touch sent a jolt of heat through her that had nothing to do with magic. "I will not let them touch you." The doors opened. The ballroom was a sea of predators. Vampires, lichens, and fae mingled under chandeliers made of bone and crystal. The music was a string quartet playing something haunting and discordant. As Kai and Josie entered, with Veronica trailing behind like a sleek bodyguard, the room went quiet. "The King of Shadows," a voice announced. Josie kept her head high. She spotted Marina Brighton across the room, holding court with a group of vampires who looked like they ate models for breakfast. Marina's eyes narrowed into slits. "Well, well," Marina said, gliding over. She wore a dress of silver scales. "You actually brought the nanny. How quaint." "She is a guest, Marina," Kai warned, his voice a low growl. "She is a curiosity," a man said, stepping out from behind Marina. He was tall, gaunt, with hair like white straw. This was Lord Vane, a member of the High Council. He looked at Josie like she was a biology specimen. "We hear rumors, Kai. Rumors that your broken son is learning." "He was never broken," Josie said before she could stop herself. Vane laughed, a dry, rustling sound. "It speaks." "Tell me, human, how do you teach a boy who cannot hear the screams of his victims?" "I teach him so he won't create victims," Josie said, her voice shaking but clear. The room fell silent. Kai's hand found the small of her back, a silent show of support. "Bold," Vane murmured. "Let us see." He snapped his fingers. From the shadows, a large, snarling wolf, not a lichen, but a feral beast, was released from a cage near the orchestra. It had been starved. It locked eyes on the smallest person in the room. Josie. "A test," Vane smiled. "If you are worthy of standing by a king, surely you can handle a dog." Kai moved to step in front of her, his fangs descending, but Vane raised a hand. "Interfere, Kai, and you break the treaty of the ball. It is a duel." The wolf lunged. Time seemed to slow. Josie didn't think. She reacted. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She raised her hands. She remembered the sign for stop. An open palm, hitting the other hand flat. But she did it with force. She poured every ounce of her fear and protective instinct into the movement. "Stop." She slammed her palm forward. A shockwave of silver force erupted from her hands. It hit the wolf in midair. The beast didn't just stop. It was blasted backward, skidding across the polished floor until it hit the far wall with a yelp. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush lungs. Josie stood there, her hands smoking slightly. Kai looked at her, pride and terror warring on his face. Veronica Starling lit a cigarette, her eyes wide. "Checkmate," she whispered. Lord Vane stared at the groaning wolf, then at Josie. "A weaver," he hissed. "You brought a weaver into our court." "I brought my son's teacher," Kai said, stepping to Josie's side and wrapping an arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him. "And as you can see, she is under my protection. Any further tests will be considered an act of war." He swept her out of the room, leaving the stunned court behind. But as they reached the elevator, Josie saw Marina's face. She wasn't scared. She was smiling, a cruel, knowing smile. She knew Josie's secret now, and she knew that secrets were weapons. The ride back to the manor was silent, but the air in the limousine was thick with unsaid things. Elian, who had been left at home with the trusted head of security, was asleep when they arrived. Josie went straight to her room, her adrenaline crashing into exhaustion. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling. She looked at her palms. They looked normal, but she could feel the hum under the skin now, a vibration that hadn't been there before. There was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," she whispered. Kai entered. He had discarded his jacket and tie. He looked weary, stripping away the armor of the king to reveal the man beneath. "You should not have had to do that," he said, standing by the door. "I didn't have a choice," Josie said. "What am I, Kai?" Lorelei said, "I'm a weaver." "What does that mean?" Kai walked over and knelt before her, the king on his knees for the waitress. He took her hands in his. His touch was gentle, reverent. "It means you are older than my kind," Kai said softly. "Before vampires, before wolves, there were those who could speak to the fabric of reality. We thought they died out. But you have the spark." "I just wanted to pay my rent." Josie let out a wet laugh, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You have done more than that," Kai said. He looked up at her, his grey eyes searching her face. "You have brought life back to a house of the dead. You have given my son a future. And—" he hesitated. "You have woken me up." He leaned in. The distance between them closed. Josie held her breath. She could smell the rain on him, the scent of power and loneliness. "Kai," she whispered. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a collision. It was hunger and desperation and centuries of restraint breaking. Josie's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, his arms wrapped around her, lifting her off the bed, pressing her against his chest as if he wanted to absorb her into his very soul. For a moment, there was no magic, no politics, no danger. Just the heat of his skin against hers, and the pounding of two hearts, one beating, one silent but heavy. Then, a sound shattered the moment, a scream, but not a vocal scream, a psychic one. It tore through Josie's head like a jagged knife. She gasped, pulling back, clutching her temples. "Elian!" Kai's eyes went wide. "I didn't hear. I heard it!" Josie cried, scrambling off the bed. "In my head! He's screaming in my head!" They bolted from the room, running down the corridor toward the nursery. The door was ajar. The guards were slumped on the floor, unconscious. The room was empty. The window was shattered, rain pouring in. On the floor, amidst the glass, lay a single object, a silver scale, from a dress. "Marina!" Kai roared, the sound shaking the foundations of the manor. His face contorted, the vampire fully surfacing, terrifying and lethal. Josie ran to the window. She looked out into the storm. Far below, near the cliffs, she saw a figure dragging a small, struggling boy toward a waiting black car. Elian looked back. He saw Josie in the window. He raised his hands. He didn't sign help. He didn't sign father. He signed run. And then, as the car door slammed shut, a massive bolt of lightning didn't strike the ground. It struck the car. But the car didn't explode. The lightning was absorbed, sucked into the vehicle as if Elian had pulled it down himself. The car sped away into the night. Kai stood beside Josie, his hand gripping the stone sill until it crumbled to dust. "She has taken him," Kai said, his voice void of all emotion, which was far scarier than his rage. "She thinks she has leverage." "She doesn't know what he can do," Josie said, staring at the spot where the lightning had vanished. "And she doesn't know what I can do." She turned to Kai. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve that matched the king's. "Get Veronica," Josie said. "We're going to war." The armory of Inglewood Manor was not filled with guns, but with relics of older, bloodier wars. Veronica Starling paced the stone floor, her high heels clicking like a metronome counting down to disaster. She was loading silver bullets into a sleek, customized pistol, the smoke from her clove cigarette curling around her like a protective ward. "Marina has taken him to Siren's Point," Veronica said, snapping the magazine into place. It's an old smuggling outpost on the cliffs, shielded against scrying, fortified against vampires, and surrounded by running water. She chose well, Kai murmured. He was strapping a sheath containing 2 obsidian daggers to his thigh. He looked calm, but it was the calm of the eye of a hurricane. The pressure radiating off him was enough to make Josie's ears pop. Running water weakens my kind. She wants me slow. She doesn't know I'm coming, Josie said. She stood by the table, staring at her hands. They weren't trembling anymore. They felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. You are the wild card, darling, Veronica said, handing Josie a heavy, iron-lined coat. Put this on. Iron grounds magic, but it also deflects hexes. Marina plays dirty. I don't want to deflect, Josie said, her voice hard. I want to strike. Kai stopped. He walked over to Josie, tilting her chin up with a finger. We are not going there for vengeance, Josie. We are going for Elian. Remember that. Rage blinds. Weaving requires focus. He's right. A raspy voice drifted from the doorway. Lorelei Yardley leaned on her staff, her white eyes gleaming in the gloom. The boy is a storm waiting to break. Marina thinks she is holding a battery, but she is holding a bomb. If you do not stabilize him, Weaver, he will level the coast. How do I stabilize him? Josie asked, desperate. Speak to him, Lorelei said. Not with your voice, with the language that binds you. The drive to Siren's Point was a blur of rain and speed. Veronica drove the armored SUV like she had a death wish, drifting around the slick cliffside curves. Below them, the ocean roared, crashing against the jagged rocks. When the lighthouse of Siren's Point came into view, it was a jagged tooth of black stone against the stormy sky. A magical barrier shimmered around it, a dome of sickly green energy. I can't cross that, Kai said, his eyes narrowing. It's a blood ward. It bars the undead. Good thing I have a pulse, Josie said, unbuckling her seatbelt. And I have high explosives, Veronica added, popping the trunk. No, Josie said, stopping them. She looked at the green dome. She could see the structure of it. It wasn't just a wall of energy. It was a tapestry of threads, woven tightly together. Explosives will trigger a collapse. The lighthouse will fall with Elian inside. She stepped out into the rain. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she didn't feel the cold. She felt the weave. She walked toward the barrier. Kai moved to follow, but hit an invisible wall 10 feet back, hissing as sparks flew from his skin. Josie! Kai roared. Trust me! She shouted back over the wind. She stood inches from the green fire. She raised her hands. She didn't use a standard sign. She closed her eyes and felt for the intent of the ward. It was built on greed and malice. She raised her hands and signed the word open, but she didn't just sign it. She grabbed the invisible threads of the air and pulled. The air screamed. It sounded like tearing metal. The green dome didn't just fade, it unraveled. Josie pulled the threads apart, turning the barrier into harmless drifts of light that dissolved in the rain. She turned back to Kai, breathless. The door is open. Kai looked at her with a mixture of awe and terrifying hunger. Then let us go get our son. The inside of the lighthouse smelled of salt and ozone. They ascended the spiral stairs, the sound of the storm outside, muffled by the thick stone walls. At the top, in the lantern room, they found them. Elian was strapped to a metal chair in the center of the room. He wasn't crying. His eyes were rolled back in his head, and his small body was glowing with a blinding white light. Cables ran from the chair to a large crystal array that Marina was manipulating. Marina looked up as they burst in. She looked manic, her hair wild, her red dress torn. "You're too late," she shrieked. "Do you see? He is infinite. He isn't a vampire. He's a conduit. I'm siphoning enough power to overthrow the council tonight." "Get away from him," Kai commanded. The air pressure in the room dropped instantly, the glass of the lantern room cracking, under the weight of his presence. "Come closer and I overload the circuit," Marina threatened, her hand hovering over a lever. "I'll fry his brain." Kai froze. For all his strength, he was helpless against the flip of a switch. But Elian wasn't unconscious. Through the haze of power, his eyes snapped open. He saw Josie. Josie locked eyes with him. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She raised her hands slowly. "Focus," she signed. "Look at me." Elian's gaze locked onto her hands. The chaotic flickering of his light stabilized. "You are not a battery," Josie signed, her movements crisp and glowing with gold light. "You are the storm." Marina laughed. "He can't hear you, you stupid human." "He doesn't need to hear," Josie whispered. She looked at the cables binding Elian. She signed cut. A blade of pure golden force slashed through the air. It severed the cables connecting Elian to Marina's machine. Sparks showered the room. Marina screamed as the feedback loop blasted her backward against the glass. "Now, Elian!" Josie signed. "Push!" Elian roared, a silent, open-mouthed cry of pure release. The lightning he had absorbed in the car, the energy Marina had tried to steal, he pushed it all out. But he didn't aim it at the room. He aimed it where Josie pointed. At Marina. The blast was blinding. It wasn't just electricity. It was force. It pinned Marina to the wall, not burning her, but holding her there in a cage of crackling static. But the lighthouse was unstable. The release of energy shattered the glass walls. The storm rushed in. The floor beneath Elian began to crumble. "Kai!" Josie screamed. Kai moved faster than thought. He leaped across the crumbling floor, grabbing Elian just as the metal chair gave way. He shielded the boy with his own body as debris rained down on them. Veronica, standing by the stairs, fired 3 shots, not at Marina, but at the support beams of the roof that were about to crush Kai. The beams shattered, falling harmlessly aside. Josie stood amidst the chaos, the wind howling around her. She saw Marina trying to crawl toward a weapon. Josie didn't hesitate. She walked over to the fallen vampiress. Marina looked up, her face twisted in hate. "You're nothing," Marina hissed. "Just a human with a parlor trick." Josie crouched down. "I'm the one who taught him how to speak." She signed one final word. "Sleep." She pressed her glowing palm to Marina's forehead. The Weaver's magic flooded Marina's mind, overloading her senses with a command she couldn't resist. Marina's eyes rolled back, and she slumped to the floor, comatose. The storm raged on, but inside the ruined lighthouse, there was silence. Kai stood up, holding Elian against his chest. The boy was conscious, exhausted, but safe. He reached out a small hand toward Josie. Josie ran to them, wrapping her arms around both the Vampire King and his son. They sank to the floor together, a tangle of wet clothes, bruises, and relief. "He spoke," Kai whispered into Josie's hair, his voice breaking. "With his power." "He spoke." "He shouted," Josie corrected, crying softly. "He finally shouted." 2 weeks later, the atmosphere at Inglewood Manor had changed. The heavy drapes were pulled back, letting the moonlight, and during the day, the filtered sunlight, wash over the stone floors. The High Council had requested an audience. They sat in the great hall, shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. Lord Vane looked particularly pale. Kai sat on his throne, looking every inch the king. But the smaller throne beside him, usually empty, was now occupied by Elian. The boy wore a miniature suit, looking bored, playing with a Rubik's Cube. And standing next to the king, not kneeling, was Josie. "The disturbance at Siren's Point has been noted," Lord Vane said, clearing his throat. "Marina Brighton has been stripped of her titles and is currently indisposed in the stasis crypts. However, the question of the boy remains. And the human." "The human has a name," Kai said, his voice echoing in the hall. "She is the Royal Weaver, and she is under my protection. Any move against her is a declaration of war against the crown." "A Weaver!" Vane scoffed, though his eyes darted nervously to Josie's hands. It is a dangerous variable, Kai, and the boy, he is volatile. We cannot have a deaf king. How will he hear the petitions? How will he command the armies? Kai looked at Josie. She stepped forward. He will not hear your petitions, Josie said, her voice clear. He will see them. He will see your lies, and he will see your loyalty. And as for commanding, she turned to Elian. Show them. Elian set down the cube. He looked at Lord Vane. He raised his hand and made a fist. The candles in the room, hundreds of them, extinguished instantly. The room plunged into darkness. Then Elian opened his hand. The candles flared back to life, but the flames were not orange. They were silver, and they didn't flicker. They stood perfectly still, controlled by the boy's will. He does not need to shout to be heard, Kai said, standing up. His silence is louder than any of you. Kai walked down the steps of the dais and took Josie's hand. He turned to the council. The old laws are finished. We do not hide in the shadows anymore. We do not view humans as cattle or pets. We weave a new world. Anyone who opposes this can leave, or they can answer to the prince. Vane looked at the silver flames, then at the glowing sigil that was faintly visible on Josie's throat, a mark of Kai's claim and her own power. Long live the king, Vane whispered, bowing his head. And the prince. Later that night, Josie stood on the balcony overlooking the ocean. The air was crisp. Kai joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. You scared them, Kai murmured. Good, Josie said. They needed scaring. Elian is asleep, Kai said. He signed, good night to me, and love. Josie turned in his arms. He's a quick learner. He has a good teacher. Kai brushed his thumb over her lips. I have a question, Josie Danvers. Yes? You signed something to me back in the lighthouse, amidst the chaos. I saw your hands move, but I didn't know the word. Josie smiled. She stepped back slightly and raised her hands. She crossed her arms over her chest, hands in fists, then brought them out, pointing index fingers at him. Forever. It means forever, she whispered. Kai caught her hands and kissed her palms, the weaver's spark mingling with the vampire's cold touch, creating a warmth that defied the laws of nature. Forever, Kai agreed. The silence of the manor was no longer empty. It was full of answers, full of light, and full of a love that had broken the boundaries of species and sound. Josie Danvers had walked into a diner shift hoping for a tip, and she had walked out with a destiny. She had taught a king to listen and a prince to speak, proving that the most powerful voice is the one that doesn't need words to scream. If you fell in love with Kai and Josie, and cheered for Elian finding his voice, please like this story, share it with your fellow romantics, and subscribe for more tales of dark romance and magical destinies. Let me know in the comments, what sign would you teach the Vampire King first?